Hey everyone, thanks for checking back in with us. My name's Eric Connor, and I'm a primary therapist at Insideout Living. We're a counseling center with offices in downtown Chicago and in Evanston, Illinois.
And my name is Steve Lackey. I'm co-founder and partner of Insideout Living.
So Steve and I, we're here today. We want to talk about something that's kind of near and dear to our hearts here in the office, and we call it the Iceberg. And it's again, all the things that we're trying to communicate in these videos we think are so important for people to know about. But a lot of times people come in and they have an addiction or they're struggling with something, and they just want to stop. So I'm just going to stop. But that doesn't really work. And why is that? And why do addictions even start in the first place? Because stopping addiction isn't really always the problem.
Right.
So I'm going to let Steve talk about some of the things with the iceberg. But we want, if for people watching this video, if you can envision in your mind an iceberg, right? There's a tip that's above the water, and then there's huge swath underneath the water. And so we have a diagram we use in our office, but at the top, we label that addictions and medicators. That's the part we all see, but there's so much underneath that. So Steve, you want to tell us a little bit about what's underneath the water?
This is a process too, but first, Eric, I wanted to mention, there's a famous quote that says that the depth of a soul is not measured by what appears on the surface. And so as Eric mentioned, the medicators and the actual addictions are those glaring things that are presented when someone first comes in, whether it be substances or process addiction. Either way, it's the thing that everyone sees, but it's right above the waterline. And as he so eloquently stated, underneath that is where a lot of the action is happening. It's sort of like a duck on water. You know, he's gliding across the surface, but underneath he's really scrambling, you know. So similarly with this process, with the iceberg, as the addictions and the medicators are the glaring visual things, right underneath what's driving the medicators and the addictions is the codependency. And that is the distortions in the thinking and the distortions in the feelings, especially when one is trying to get validation and qualification from someone else. There's that distortion around how do you feel about what you think and what you believe in, because your value system has been altered. So codependency, which is the distortion of thinking and feeling, drives the medicators and the addictions. And what drives codependency oftentimes, and maybe if you want to speak more to this, is the shame and the guilt. And the shame and the guilt, again, is the value of the sense of self. It's that self-worth, that unworthiness, that low self-esteem, and that feeling that every time that I use, whether it's substances or it's in my sex addiction or if it's an eating disorder, whatever compulsivities that are being presented, there's always a feeling of shame and guilt. And I know that in a previous video we talked about the sugar high. We talked about once you come down off of eating that chocolate cake and that sugar rush goes down, you feel that feeling of despair. So if you want to talk a little, or do you want me to continue?
Well, no, so why don't you continue on? So we're going down the iceberg here. So we hit codependency, and you say underneath the codependency that fuels that is feelings of shame and guilt.
Exactly.
And then what fuels the shame and guilt?
What fuels the shame and guilt is the fear of abandonment and the fear of rejection. And if you look across any trauma spectrum, whether there's a huge trauma associated with your family of origin, or there's that disengaged rigidity that one finds in your family of origin, there's that feeling of fear of abandonment and rejection. It's always there. And as research suggests, abandonment is when you lose or miss out on that attachment when you're first born, you know, when your family of origin, where you're to be nurtured and you're be instilled with all these values, affection, love, and affirmation. When that's not there, there's always a feeling of abandonment, even and specifically if there's an absence of one parent or a primary caretaker. And the rejection has more to do with your ability to open to being loved and to give love, and then that's not there. Okay. There's that feeling of rejection.
Yeah, Steve is you're very like listening to you. It's very intelligent. It's very intellectual. So, which is fantastic.
Right.
But, I mean, because these are really deep topics.
Right.
But just to kind of summarize, I think we're saying as for most people that come with an addiction, it's not just stopping the addiction. It's drilling down, and inevitably, somewhere along the line, there was some sense growing up of a deep loss or a deep abandonment, and because kids, they're totally egocentric, as they should be, so their whole world is like, kind of revolves around them. So if something goes wrong with attachment, a lot of times they think it's them, that's shame, and then if I feel shame, I need to live my life a certain way for the sake of others, for my own, to quell those feelings. That's codependency, and the bottom line is, that way of living is a pretty cruddy way to live.
Yes.
And so when you're living that way, you need something to make you feel better, and all of a sudden addictions can kind of pop up. So for anyone that's out there, this is something that you can talk to your own therapist about, or anyone else. It's not just stopping the addiction, it's drilling down that iceberg to see where did this kind of all start. And it's investigative, but that's where some of the really deep healing work can happen.
Sure. And in the next video, we can talk a little bit about, what that looks like, the arousal template, the hijacked brain, and the neural pathways that are involved in this process.
Yep. So that's it. So this was kind of a PhD level one, it turns out. But thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Goodbye.